Design Leader Insights is brought to you by Fuego UX, a UX research, strategy, and design consultancy. Hey, Alex, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And to start out, can you give the audience a little background into your journey in design systems?
Yeah, sure. So, I, I actually got into it before it was really called the design system. I was building UI kits for different companies that I had worked for, and I'm at Rowe Price now, and we started with building UI kits and found that
Yeah.
eventually that we needed to pair that up with design and then build a formalized design system. We didn't want to have a UI kit or a style guide. We wanted a centralized location for it all. And so that's how I got into a formal design system work, and I've never looked back. So excited to be on, excited to talk about it with you and with your audience.
Going back a little bit more, you're more of an engineering background or design background?
So definitely more in the engineering background. And in fact, I started my career as a back-end engineer, eventually got into
Okay.
the front-end space, really got intrigued by this system thinking of how can we like keep sharing what we're building, because I hated building the same thing over and over again when you switch between the different products. And then I was really hooked on that front end work. It was constant feedback and immediate feedback, which is something I really enjoy.
One of the things that I like about your background is, any designer is going to have to collaborate with engineering. Before we dive into design systems specifically, how do you advise that for someone who maybe has that perspective in your back pocket? Like, how should designers think about working with their engineering peers?
I think it's important to stress the reason why choices are made, because from a developer's point of view, a lot of the time you don't understand why the design choices are made, and it's sometimes it could be questionable. It's like, I've got to make this animation, it's going to take me such a certain period of time, and that could be lengthy. Why am I doing this? And then you could come with like that reasoning. You say, this is why we've made this decision. It's backed by research. And then that developer gains empathy for the position of the
Mm.
designer, and over time you end up collaborating a lot more together, and it becomes more of a conversation rather than a storytelling from designer to dev. The dev might eventually start asking questions. Why aren't we tackling it this way that was proposed for this other design? Where's the consistency there? And so then you can actually have a real back and forth, which I think is nice.
So I think that when I hear about a big company, implementing a design system, when does that become the reality? Like, I know there's big companies that still don't have them, and I know there's small companies that probably have a very sophisticated one. So it feels like, when do you
Yeah.
actually take that step?
Well, it's a great question, because I think there's this idea that, especially for people that are new to design systems, or companies that are new to design systems, that it's a project and then eventually it'll be completed. But really, it's a full blown
Yeah.
program that requires a lot of governance and maintenance and thought and people people problems and development problems and design problems. There's just so much going on in the design system space, even within a single company. I think the tricky part is really showing the value, which, when you look at a design system, you think about the sharing portion of it, there's a lot of value there, and there's a lot of value in consistency. But until people are actually seeing it and understand what the meaning behind the design system, sometimes it's hard to pitch that. To answer your question about how do you scale at a large company, I think you gotta work through those really early growing pains. But once you're there, it really starts moving. And I think that we're in a good spot now at the firm, and we've got like a ton of buy-in, and of course like OKRs and business initiatives aligned.
One of the stats I always see when reading about enterprise design systems is still that somewhere between 40 and 50% aren't successful in the long run. And I don't know if that comes down to, not explaining the value to higher ups, or that's not getting translated to users. The usability issues aren't being addressed, or really why these design systems are failing. I'm wondering if you have any insights into that, and how teams can avoid being in that in on a team where the design system doesn't necessarily like pan out, I guess.
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to thinking about the user. And I'm not necessarily talking about the end user here. Extremely important, of course, is the end user. However,
Yeah.
we have to think about our developers, our authors, our designers, our A/B testers, and make sure that the experience that they have with what we're building is extremely strong. Because I think that the points of failure end up occurring when you have a product, maybe you've built it, but it's not been built in a way that is, maybe you don't have consistent APIs on the tech stack. Maybe the designs are falling apart. Maybe the designs are all over the place and you're in a large Figma file and it's really hard to understand and read through. And so people would rather deviate because it's not easy enough. It has to be easier than their current process or pretty darn close to it. So
Yeah.
that way they not only see the benefit, but they're also not taking longer with what they're doing. And so I think that's really key. And then showcasing the work as well. Once you start getting people engaged with your product,
Yeah.
then there's a higher likelihood that they'll use it and want to contribute back as well. And that's another whole piece to a design system. That doesn't mean that that's not a measure for success, but it's certainly a part of the scaling process.
Let's move on to like where do you think design systems are headed? Because I know everything like constantly evolving, right? Like in the tools that be it the tools that you're using to create them or the value that they drive. Where do you think design systems are going in the next 5 to 10 years?
I think they're going to become more and more popular at different companies, but I think the tooling has to get there so that way it makes it easier for the companies uh, to build and then have their teams adopt. I think we're also going to see influence from AI, from all the different tools that we're seeing out there on the design side and on the tech side. Design side, maybe Figma will come out with more different plugins that will encourage AI or generative AI usage where it iterates on a design. That way, especially if you're a part of a smaller team, it expedites
Mhm.
that divergent thinking because you start with a single design and maybe you don't have those people to bounce the idea off of. And if you are able to come up with 10 variants of that design, that could speed up your process a lot more than just kind of handling it by yourself. And then, of course, on the tech side, there's a lot of no code tools out there that teams are looking to build with, but there are also challenges with that too. So there's a lot of companies I think that are trying to create products for design systems, and we're seeing how well they work over time. The generation of code from designs seems like a great idea, and I think that it is in certain use cases. But the API and the code that's generated has to be really solid.
Not only are there a lot of new designers entering the field today, but these designers are probably being asked to work on design systems or with design systems focused teams for the first time. So, what advice would you have for those folks?
When we're thinking about new designers or new design system engineers, really anybody
Yeah.
that's working with a design system, it's really important to focus on the system as a whole and how that breaks down. It's no longer about how does this component or design work within my context, but it's how does this work within all contexts. And that applies to someone that's working on an application or working on the design system, because then you almost have to think about the design system as not just fulfilling the need of one, but the need of everybody. So if you want a thing to be built, it's not going to just happen right away. It's not going to be designed right away. There's got to be a lot of thinking and time that goes uh, into structuring those specs.
Alex, I think there's a lot of designers out there who have been trained about designing for the user, see that single design out there, it's in the wild, iterate on it. Um, and I think that mindset is very different once those designers will be going on to a design system team. So, how do you advise those new designers to think about working in a system, design system versus, individual components or individual user journeys, maybe?
Yeah, I think it's a great question because it is actually quite different. You've got to think of all the different use cases of how that component could, it could be used in the wild in product A, B, C, D, and future E, which we don't know exists yet. Understand also how your company currently has those components used in the wild. Bring them all together and see what's missing. There might be gaps, and it could take you a while to figure this out. It's worth spending the time, I think, up front to figure that out. We've seen it work really well at the firm, and we've also seen that flow really well into dev, because from our technical side, we can start coming up with architectures based on these use cases, and we know that when we implement it in code, that we've considered a broad range of how developers, designers, and the users expect to interact with the component that's being built, because we don't want to block innovation while also creating
Right.
these systems. We want to make sure that designers feel empowered to uh, use the foundational parts of the design system to create new experiences, because we don't have everything, and we probably never will have everything that everyone needs, but we can come up with guidelines of how things should be used and then bring more into the system over time as we see those needs arise.
Alex, thanks so much for coming on the series today.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been a lot of fun.